One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 172 today. And I am here with a very special guest. This is the second time he's been on my show. He hosts the fantastic show Syriana Analysis. Absolutely brilliant. Please welcome Kevork. Hey, Kevork, how are you doing today?
Hey, brother, I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm okay, mate. I'm okay. The weather here in New Zealand's a bit over the top. How about you? What have you been up to today? And I still see you keeping the beard. It's a bit bigger since the last time we did the show. Keeping the beard, good?
Yeah, it's the rainy weather. That's why we're getting enough water. Wherever you go, it's raining here. It's dark, and I'm just trying to take care of the beard, of the family, of the work. So a lot of things to do.
Yep. You've got a fancy new studio. Like it, mate. Very new. You got the mat behind you. You got a good, nice setup. Like big mic. That's all good. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I try to upgrade from time to time, especially the audio quality. I think it is important for the audience to listen and hear the podcast, the conversation, the analysis in the best way possible. Then comes, of course, the webcam. The studio, I had this on my background. Let's say I used to record from this direction and the entire map in my back. And I'm trying to do more of a different angle now, and especially a little bit the camera farther from me so I can have more freedom of movement during the show so the people can also see the body language.
Yeah. It's very, very good. Mate. Especially, I can imagine there in Germany. It's got like been very. I hope you're enjoying it over there. And I mean, the time's gone so fast. It's almost Christmas, eh? Wow. It's just
Yeah,
like insane, isn't it? How insane.
yeah. We
So
have
yeah,
now all these security blocks everywhere because the Christmas is approaching and we have Christmas markets everywhere. But at the
yeah.
same time comes the fear of somebody coming
Oh
with a
yeah.
suicide vest or with a track. So they are installing all these blocks and protection everywhere.
I know that would be another CIA Mossad infiltrated attack again, which would, just like what happened, which has happened a few times. So speaking about that, Kavort, um, yeah, so speaking of that, as we all know, last time since we did the show, a lot has happened. We had the fall of Assad, USA, more shenanigans in the Middle East, the Ukraine war reaching its, kind of reaching its peak now, which a lot of people think, Trump meeting with Giuliani, a guy who was used to be a guy who was on the terrorist list and he's CIA controlled and all of that, and Israel still committing their genocide and all of that, and the Middle East changing. And of course, Israel and Iran getting at it. A lot has changed, and you've been doing the great shows that you've been doing, which is really good. I like the latest interview you did with Kim. That was fantastic, really good show. I just wanted to ask you, Kavor, ever since then, so as we all know, what exactly do you think happened to Assad since it's been a year since his fall? In the research that you've done, what conclusions have you come to? Was he betrayed or did something happen? And what are the remains of Assad's army in Syria right now?
Actually, I believe that the former Syrian government, led by Assad, they emerged victorious between 2011 to 2017 and 18 from the military conflict. And they managed to capture large swaths of territories from the terrorist organizations such as al-Nusra, ISIS, and the rest of the different shades and colors of terrorist organizations, mostly supported, funded by different regional and international powers. And we all know who stands behind these terrorist groups in Syria, especially through Operation Timber Sycamore, CIA covert operation in Syria. But when Trump came to power in 2017, he ended the Operation Timber Sycamore, and we learned that the CIA has spent $1 billion per year to train and arm these multinational tech-free jihadists in the country. And since then, the Trump administration, in his first term, he stopped the military warfare and he started an economic warfare. So between 2011 and 2017, when the Syrian army used to fight against these terrorist organizations, the Syrian people overwhelmingly, those who live under Assad, those were the majority, 70% of the people, they saw a clear threat coming from the terrorist organizations. They are destroying and sabotaging their own apartments, homes, houses, businesses, infrastructure, electricity, water, and everything. And at the other hand, they saw the Syrian army defending them. So they stood by the Syrian army and supported the Syrian army. There was a clear support for Assad and the Syrian army. But after 2017, when Operation Timber Sycamore was over and the US started and waged its economic warfare, especially the Caesar Act, they choked the Syrian economy so much from the outside world, especially from the businesses who were coming to Syria and supplying Syria with the basic necessities, including companies in allied countries. Because remember, Syria is a small economy, or wasn't a small economy, it was a small market. And all the third country companies under the Caesar Act, they had no, let's say, right under American Caesar Act to deal with Syria. So if, let's say, there is a business company in Thailand or Taiwan or in China or in Russia, which they have good relationship with the US and they're doing business relationship with the US, but at the same time they want to supply some goods to Syria, under the Caesar Act, the US was able to blackmail them and tell them that they will no longer deal with this company. So these companies preferred dealing with the US over Syria. And basically, because the Syrian these oil and fuel and gas were completely occupied by the US, mostly in the eastern shore of the Euphrates, and the infrastructure was destroyed. So the Syrian government was no longer able to supply its people with the surviving basic necessities like electricity, food, fuel, and medication, for example. So the people all of a sudden saw themselves that after 7 to 8 years of fighting alongside the government in the Syrian army against these terrorist organizations, that they couldn't reach into an outcome that is preferable for the people who fought alongside the Syrian army, including the families, because where the Syrian army comes from, it's the Syrian people fighting in the Syrian army and they have families supporting them. But now, because the soldiers who fought all this time, they got injured mentally, physically, psychologically, and they found themselves that they're making a $50 per month. They're unable to secure bread, milk, food for their family. So they got demoralized. They couldn't continue fighting for the same government, which now cannot provide for the Syrian people. So this was, in my opinion, the first factor why Assad's popularity diminished so much in the past 3 to 4 years, including, of course, the corruption in the country. But at the same time, I also believe that several regional countries, they have financial surplus in their own countries, and they had the money to pay to the Julani terrorists. So the Syrian army soldier receives $50 per month, and then the Julani terrorist receives between 800 to $1,000 per month, and this money usually comes from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and other rich countries. So accordingly, you had a misbalance in the country. One side in Idlib, with small population, 3 million people living there, they have electricity coming from Turkey. They deal with the Turkish lira. They don't use the Syrian lira, because the Syrian lira has been destroyed completely after the sanctions. And so the Idlib economy has become part of the Turkish economy. And at the same time, the salaries are coming. They're building themselves malls, supermarkets, and everything, the goods, the products, the food, and everything coming for them from the outside world. So they created a state inside a state. They emboldened Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS, and then prepared them for this attack. But there is one more important factor, and that is the allies of Syria. They didn't approve on the offensive against Idlib several times because they didn't want to sabotage their relationship with Turkey. They wanted to allow Turkey to play a certain role in the country for their own sake, whether it's in Iran or it's in Russia. And at the same time, they asked the Syrian army not to move an inch inside Idlib because they wouldn't give Syria basically what they need to carry on such an offensive. So it's a combination of factors. I believe there was a conflict of interest as well between Assad and his allies, because his allies were telling him to reconcile with Turkey. But this reconciliation was with a big price. Like, the allies wanted for Assad to accept Turkey as a um, de facto power in the north, which can have forces underground and have leverage and influence over the Syrian people, something that Assad rejected, wanted to keep the sovereignty of the country, and he insisted on liberating Idlib. And I think at the end of the day, because of the conflict of interests as well between Syria and its allies, the allies saw Turkey as a more important player in the region than Syria. So I think that once the offensive of Julani happened against Aleppo, the allies of Syria had no appetite to support Assad this time, and they made a deal with Turkey and with the US and with Israel. And unfortunately, they handed over the country to basically Turkey and Israel. They are the victorious powers of this conflict, the Erdogan and Benjamin Netanyahu. And now the rules of the engagement have changed, and Iran and Russia were the dominant power in Syria. They used to set the rules of the Syrian game, and now they are on the periphery. Iran is completely out, and Russia basically became a secondary power in the country, basically playing with the rules of the game that Netanyahu and Erdogan set in this case. So I think those were the reasons why Assad fell. I don't think that there was as some people claim or say, like there was all of a sudden all the Syrian army betrayed him. No, it didn't happen that way. This was a process of during this time that the Syrian army and their families were demoralized because of the economic warfare and the lack of support, since Syria's natural resources were mostly in the hands of the occupiers. And eventually, I think this was a decision from Assad to leave the scene, and also for the people to see what is going to come next. I think he was warning them for a long time. He fought for them, but then if the majority of the people then decided the other way, I think he should just leave. And as he did, he left, and now you see the consequence on the ground.
Kevork, as if I'm someone who's new, wanting to know the truth about this, so tell me, what is, as you like to point out in a good video, good title for a video you did, which was a good video, as it said, made in an emperor's lab. Tell us the truth about the Syrian revolution. How was Julani made by the CIA and Mossad? And another good question is here, another thing also to point out too, how did Jeffrey Epstein and like Israel shape Syria as a country from that too, like the influence they've had with the latest developments? Go.
I think Jolani's past is very interesting. There are lots of information that we still do not know. But when the Iraqi security forces captured him and sent him to the Buka camp, they sent him to a CIA-run camp. And I believe the Americans and the Israelis and the Brits, they have these unique skills in turning enemies into assets, especially when they end up in jail. They recruit them as double agents. And it is possible that Jolani was recruited in the Buka camp. And I don't think his release at the beginning of the so-called Syrian revolution was a coincidence. And I don't think that Baghdadi sending him to Syria also was a coincidence to form Jabhat al-Nusra, and which became the strongest force on the ground. And in 2012, the Defense Intelligence Agency of the US warned Obama, telling him that the driving force behind the insurgency against Assad was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, where Jolani came from, the Salafists, the Jihadists, and the Muslim Brotherhood. All the groups Kurds who are now in power in Syria. So they knew that those were the fighting force on the ground. And Obama, despite that, put his signature on Operation Timber Sycamore and allowed the CIA to recruit and arm and train these jihadists. Now, Julani, of course, his main sponsor was Turkey. In Turkey, there was a joint military operation room called MOM, MOM, and in this joint operation military operation room, there were the Turkish military, the American, the Brits, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Jordanians, and many others. They have decided they decide there basically who they should support and who they should send the training, the money, the logistics, the ammunition. And it was proven during the Syrian war that the Al-Qaeda offshoot has been the strongest force and the most ideologically driven and committed to fight against what they called the infidel Assad regime. So this is the reality that many people, in my opinion, reject up until this moment. But the vast majority of the fighters against Assad were the jihadists, and America supported them in Syria. And I believe here the MIT played an instrumental role in protecting Jolani in Idlib and creating state inside a state for him there, and embolden him to a great extent until the time comes for such an offensive. So, in my opinion, in this case, Americans and the Turks were, of course, collaborating, and Turkey is a NATO country, and on the Turkish soil, there were other important regional powers. Now, Israel, of course, comes in the package of the US. When you are receiving an aid from the US, military aid and training, the first condition that any of these backers ask to any party, for example, they give weapon to the Lebanese army and they put condition in the contract that you cannot use these weapons against Israel. So accordingly, I believe Jolani has become indirectly an asset for Israel through his cooperation with the United States. And when they decided to wage this offensive on Idlib, on Aleppo, and capture it, during this time, it was already agreed with Jolani before he wages the attack on Aleppo that once he comes to power, he has to do a few things, and one of which is normalizing ties with Israel, giving up on the Golan Heights, and kicking out the Palestinian factions, and closing the borders with Lebanon, and hence the supply chains of Hezbollah. So he knew that this is his role before he waged the attack on Aleppo. And when he came to Damascus, the first thing he did, he said, we don't pose a threat on Israel. We accept the 1974 disengagement agreement, and we will join the Abraham Accords. Although he says that it's not the right time to speak about it, but they're talking to the Israelis all the time to normalize ties. So it's just a matter of time for Syria to join the Abraham Accords under Jolani. And that's how he presented himself as a useful asset for different regional powers. But Jolani needs support in Syria, right? Like, who supports Jolani at the end of the day in the country? I believe there are probably 20% of people who are very committed in supporting him. And then you have a certain percentage of people who see Jolani as just, yeah, he's a Sunni leader, so why not? You know, they don't support him wholeheartedly, but because he replaced Assad and he is a Sunni, so some people just support him because he is from the Sunni sect. But you have probably 30 to 40% of the Syrians are hardcore oppositionists to Jolani, some of whom have already guns. The Kurds are trained by the US. Now, Sweden, the Druze have also guns and militias. So the Alawites and the Christians are the only ones who don't have any protection or protectorate or anyone supporting them in the country or giving them any, let's say, assistance to also resist the Jolani attacks against them. So the country is already fragmented. It's already balkanized on different lines. And Jolani has been very useful for Israel in this case to create these vertical lines in the country and basically divide the country. This is what Israel wanted. It was for a long time, they were talking about the Yenon plan and create different security zones in the country, manageable security zones. Each are cantons, mostly one colored. One area is only Christian, one area is only Druze, one area is only Kurds, etc. But under the previous regime, it was more people were coexisting together. Like in same neighborhood, you could encounter or see and live among different shades and ethnicities and sects and religions. People never ask about your religion or sect. So this is the new reality. The national identity has been destroyed of Syria, and it's been replaced by sub-identities, and each group now identifies itself according to his or her religion, sect, ethnicity. And that's why I say Syria is no longer Syria, because what Syria made Syria is this different groups were coexisting together in peace and harmony. But once you remove the centralized government and you destroy the state institutions and you push for the narrative and radicalize the people, thanks to Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and many other regional media outlets, it's been a very long time, 14 years of indoctrination. I think it's enough time for the people to turn against each other and hate each other and fight each other. And so the country is completely fragmented. So we're waiting to see what are they going to decide in the US, whether they will give Jolani centralized powers as Turkey wants, or decentralized powers as Israel wants. So it's now a certain conflict of interest in the country between Turkey and Israel over the type and the nature of the governance that they aspire. Israel wants to give autonomy to the minorities so that it can present itself as a savior and protectorate. And Turkey wants for Jolani to have centralized power on the entirety of Syria. And this depends on the US at the end of the day. So we will see whether it's Tom Barak's decision or Netanyahu's decision at the end of the day.
What is it like for minorities and women in Syria at the moment, and not like under Durrani's regime, and not to mention what type of, like, especially with all the crimes, we're seeing, like, of the woman being targeted, and like minorities and religious groups, especially the Orthodox Christians and the Alawites who are getting targeted, because you mentioned there's kind of a genocide going on. From what you've seen, like how the minorities and women treated there compared to Assad, and what type of like stuff and crimes that you're seeing going on that the Durrani regime is committing. Go.
I think the Jolani regime is trying to portray itself as just a normal political system which could protect women and minorities. And I believe on a higher level, Jolani probably wishes that his minorities would accept him. But long story short, the changing his outfit probably was beneficial for him to sell himself as a reformed politician to the outside world. But who who is the army of Jolani at the end of the day? They are Al Qaeda forces. So whether you change you keep its name Al Nusra or you change it to HTS and now you call it General Security of the Syrian Army, it's not going to change the fact that these people have been fighting alongside Al Qaeda and they are long indoctrinated to believe in this ideology. So whether Jolani changes his outfit or not, is the people who fought for him and still fighting for him have not changed their outfit, have not changed their badges, have not changed their mentality, have not changed their ideology. So at the end of the day, I'm saying even if Jolani wants, even if hypothetically wants to create certain stability in the country, his forces who fought for him and still fighting for him are ideologically anti, let's say, women. They don't believe that women should have rights in the country. They also believe in what they call the purification of the Syrian society. It's like similar to the Nazis when they tried to kill and eliminate the Jews from their society. And this is the same approach of the people who fight for Jolani. They say we have to first eliminate and purify our society from the Islamic minorities, especially the Alawites, the Shiites, the Yazidis, the Druze. And they believe that these sects are what they call Khawarij. They have went out of Islam and they have deviated from the true teachings of Islam. This is according to their understanding, and therefore they have to first purify the society, and after they purify their society from these Islamic sects, then they move against the Christians, against the Kurds, against the Jewish people, for example. This is what they believe. So despite all this PR campaign to paint Jolani as a reformed leader, he's shaking hands with a rabbi in the United States or not, and he meets with the Jewish people. But on the ground, his forces believe in the opposite. So I think there is a big contradiction now between what Jolani is doing, because he ran on the platform of creating an Islamic state, purifying the society. And once he came to power, he just flipped 180 degrees. But that's not going to fly with the fighters of Jolani. So he has two options now: either to reform his own army and try to eliminate the hardcore jihadists from his militias, or these militias will go against him. And this is very interesting situation that we have to continue watching, because some of the hardcore jihadists, they don't accept what Jolani is doing and they're criticizing him. So Jolani is also giving coordinations to the US army to strike some of these groups in Idlib. Like there are different groups in Idlib who reject what Jolani is doing at the current moment, because they run on the platform of creating an Islamic state. Done now that we arrived in power, they say, why are we going to continue with this approach with the US and open up to Israel, etc. So Jolani is sharing coordinations of these groups and their leadership with the US, and the US is carrying out drone attacks against them in Idlib to assassinate them. And when they do that, they are basically empowering Jolani. So I think in the US, they believe that Jolani is capable of bringing this chaos among these jihadists into certain order. And therefore, they see in him a great asset in Damascus, in order to finally, after 75 years of struggle of power over Syria, because this started from the 50s, in 1950s, that was the first attempt of a coup by the CIA in Syria, and they've been trying for 75 years to bring Syria under the US umbrella, and that's why Tom Barak a few days ago said, he made the compliment to this new regime and said such a regime could come once in a lifetime, every 100 years. And he's correct. They have been trying for 75 years to bring a regime like Jolani to power, who wants friendly relationship with the US. Not that the former regimes didn't want friendly relationship with the US. In the contrary, Syria and the US, I don't see under Assad had strategic, let's say, conflict among each other. The reason was Israel. Syria at no point wanted to become an enemy to the United States. It was a superpower. And of course, it was an ally of the Soviet Union, but at the same time, always aspired for good relationship with the US, never wanted to become an enemy. But it was Israel which set these rules that Syria is an enemy for the US, because Syria was in a struggle of power against Israel. So eventually, because the Israeli lobby and the billionaire class, the AIPAC in the United States, they always have their way, and they could shape the foreign policy of the US in favor of Israel. Then the US started seeing Syria as an enemy, although Syria they shouldn't have seen Syria as an enemy. They could have gained Syria as a partner in fighting against different, let's say, Al-Qaeda groups in the region, or finding Syria to cooperate in different fights in Iraq or in Lebanon. But they picked the fight with Syria because Israel wanted that. And as Jeffrey Sachs says, the decision to change the regime in Syria came from Jerusalem, not from Washington. It was Netanyahu who pushed for this regime change, and Obama started it in 2011 through Operation Timber Sycamore for the sake of Israel. And the proof of that is that now, once the regime changed, have they brought democracy to Syria? No. Have they brought freedoms to Syria? No. Have they improved the women's situation? No. Have they given equal rights to the minorities? No. Is there security? No. Is there stability? No. There is nothing. But there is the attempt to normalize ties with Israel and give up on the Golan Heights, so the US accepts it, because this was the core of the issue from the beginning. It was never about freedom and democracy as they claimed.
That's a very good way to put it. That is very truthful. Also, you said the economic hitman that arrived in Syria with the RMF. You mentioned in a video, while the world was focusing on Donald Trump receiving Junai meeting him in the White House, the IMF quietly stepped into the Syrian area. What's that about? Like, what's going on there?
Actually, in the US, al-Julani met with the head of the IMF. I think her name is Georgina or something. I forgot her name. And she called him Mr. President. She was very happy to meet you, and they are looking forward for cooperation with Syria. And the IMF is the US empire's basically economic hitman. And what they do, basically, they targeted the Syrian economy, they impoverished the Syrian people, they destroyed the Syrian infrastructure, they imposed draconian sanctions on the Syrian economy, they have taken over Syria's carbohydrates, and now in the Mediterranean, they will also have access to Syria's gas fields. So they have the water resources, carbohydrates, phosphate, wheat, cotton, and the destruction of the Syrian economy completely. So under such circumstances, how can Syria reconstruct? This is a $200 to $300 billion worth of investment. Who is going to pay? Probably Qatar and Saudi Arabia could invest a little bit, let's say 50 billion, 60 billion, I don't know. But the rest, they will get loans. And once the IMF gives loans to Syria, this is going to be a forever debt for Syrian economy and the Syrian people, which means Syria, which had $7 billion debt to the outside world, most 70% from the days of the Soviet Union, and Russia was not asking for this money. So eventually Syria had almost zero foreign debt. Now we have 300 billion debt to the outside world if we want to reconstruct the country. And this debt will last for generations. Syrians will not be able to pay as long as their economy is controlled by foreign powers, which means Syria eventually will become a puppet government, puppet state to the US forever, because al-Julani could come and go, and whoever comes next, he will also succeed the responsibilities and succeed the debt. And once you have a forever debt, you will become a country where your fate and destiny is always tied to this money of the IMF and the outside world. And this comes with political conditions, because the IMF is not charity. They give you money, but they ask you for reforms. And those reforms are to privatize your economy, your sectors, devalue your own currency, and a package of political conditions to Syria. So what they're trying to do is a long investment in Syria, where even if al-Julani leaves, let's say in 10 years or 20 years, whoever comes next, he will be forced to accept the American terms, because without the IMF money, then his country will completely collapse. And this is basically how they did with Egypt, right? Egypt's economy is completely hostage now to the IMF. And even if Egypt wants to play a better role in the region, or increasing regional role, They cannot do that because their hands are cuffed, their hands are tied, and their economy is dependent on American security packages, this financial aid that they receive, and plus the IMF. Therefore, you see that the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and UAE, come to Egypt's economy and they invest, buy assets, for example, to keep the country operating. But this gives them influence over the Egyptian economy, which means you will have limited autonomy and limited sovereignty. And Syria moved from an economy in 2011, we used to have zero foreign debt. We used to export the fuel. We used to export electricity to Lebanon and Jordan. We used to export cotton and wheat and carbohydrates and phosphates and metals to the outside world. And we had the food security for 5 years in the country, into country where we are now completely reliant on these outside forces, although we have the resources. But because they destroyed the infrastructure, they destroyed the companies, they destroyed the factories, and they have taken over the carbohydrates, then Syria is now completely torn apart. And without a national economy, you cannot reconstruct the country and stay independent. So I think they have won this war for a long time. It's a strategic victory for the US, and the people have to accept this as a defeat for what used to be called the axis of resistance, and they have to accept it as a defeat also for multipolarity, because Syria, in my opinion, was too important to lose. But the Americans have they started other important conflicts, for example, in Ukraine. For Russia, it's an existential war, and Russia prefers its existence over having an extended power in the Middle East. And China is still playing a passive role in with its allies. They don't want to engage militarily or financially in conflict zones. So the result is that Turkey is a bold player, and they have moved on the chessboard, and Israel is the same, and the US is the same. So they lost the Middle East completely to the US. And remember, without the Middle East, without Syria, if in the near future, which is going to happen, they will try to kick the Russian forces out of Syria, then Russia will be isolated in the Black Sea. And if the Russians are isolated in the Black Sea, they will remain an above regional power. They will never become a superpower without a fleet in the Mediterranean and an access to the warm waters. So that's why I believe the Americans have won this game in the Middle East for now, and the Russians are preparing themselves to have a strong, let's say, presence in the Black Sea, yes, but with limited access to the warm waters. And the Chinese, I think, the Jolani regime have invited many Uyghurs to fight alongside them, around 5,000 fighters. So will they hand over these Uyghurs to China? I suspect that. I think that the MIT have groomed them and brought them all the way, paid their salaries for a bigger game. Turkey is waiting to embolden its position in Syria. And then when this corridor between Turkey and Azerbaijan are open, then Turkey will have overland access to the Caspian Sea and to Central Asia. And when they do that and embolden their position in Syria, they will make a move against Russia. If the if Jolani is elected, let's say in 2-3 years, and there are some sham elections in the country, and he calls himself finally an elected president, then he could consider the Russian forces an occupation force in Syria. And remember, he was on Fox News and he said Russia has played a role in one way or another in the war against the Syrian people. So he sees Russia as an enemy. And he will, in my opinion, in a few years, when he emboldens himself thanks to Turkey and other players, they will take a move against Russia to kick the Russian fleet out of the Mediterranean, so they could have a full access of the gas fields. And that's why Turkey is building all these warships in the Mediterranean to take over these gas fields, also in Syria, and challenge the Cyprus and the Greek, let's say, access to these gas fields on the shores or in the region, let's say in the Mediterranean, and plus this overland access to the Caspian Sea and Central Asia when this corridor, Trump corridor, or what they call it, the Zangetor corridor, is opened through Armenia. I think this would be an opportunity for them to send also the Uyghurs back, probably first to Afghanistan, and then try to destabilize some of the Central Asian countries where the Silk Road Initiative passes through. So I think China and Russia should be very careful with Julani, and normalizing him is a great mistake. They could receive him. He's at the end the de facto leader of Syria, but trusting him is like trusting Erdogan. And every time they trusted Erdogan, Erdogan hit them back in the back, because um, Erdogan has a big project in the region, and they want to become the most influential player in the Middle East, and therefore the Russian presence is an obstacle, the Chinese presence is an obstacle, and they will try to minimize that. So my opinion is that if the Russians and the Chinese aspire for a multipolar world, you cannot have a multipolar world without the Middle East. It's not like yes, we are winning in Ukraine, we are winning in other places economically, but the Middle East is one of the most vital energy where the energy resources exist. It is one of the most vital trade routes in the Middle East, and you have the fleet in the Mediterranean. And sacrificing Syria in this case will not help the multipolarity at all. And the Jolani regime will be like a fifth column, a Trojan horse in BRICS if they let Syria and the Jolani join the BRICS, just like some of the other countries who joined the BRICS and they are believed to be Trojan horses.
Kevork, before we finish off, just one more question. My friend Heidi, good friend, shout out to her, she's very good. Wanted to ask here, do you see Syria ever rising? Do you see the people in Syria ever rising up to Julani and doing a coup and taking back its power? Like, do you ever see that happening? Like, or no? Can you just not see that happening? And do you know the Mark Twain tweet about Damascus?
I think the simple answer is no. A coup and an armed insurgency, a revolution against Jolani is not possible at the current moment for multiple reasons. Syrian people have endured 14 years of war. They are impoverished, 95% of them below the poverty line. Their priorities are bread and fuel and the basic necessities for their families. They are too distracted by the daily life and the hardships of the daily life. And if there is going to be an uprising against Jolani or an armed uprising, there has to be a regional power or an international power giving the people the necessary means to fight against Jolani, right? Jolani has 40,000 manpower. Who is going to fight against Jolani without guns? Who is going to provide these weapons? Nobody has an interest in doing that. Neither Iran nor Russia nor China. There is no party in the region who wants to do that. So I think that's a far-fetched idea. It's not going to happen anytime soon. Maybe in the future, when the people reach to a point, especially the Sunnis, that the Jolani regime has pushed them so much to the edge that there could be some clashes. It should come from the Sunnis. The minorities rising against the Jolani regime is going to cause a civil war in the country. It's not going to work. The Sunnis have to realize that Jolani is an asset. He's a traitor. He's an asset for the US, for Israel, for them to rise. But in a region where sectarianism has been so normalized and people think mostly through the sectarian lens, which explains why many Palestinians celebrated the regime change in Syria, because they are celebrating also how can you celebrate your own demise in Palestine via supporting Jolani? The reason is sectarianism. That's why you see big talking heads in Palestine, for example, in Gaza also itself. They are supporting Jolani, although he is clearly pro-Zionism. The reason is because Jolani is a Sunni. So unless you disinfect the people's minds from this sectarian hatred and racism, you're not going to build a nation state. You're not going to build a future for the people in the region. This has been the dream of Israel for a long time, to turn the Sunnis against the Shias and the Shias against the Sunnis and the Alawites and the Kurds and everyone. They have talked about it in the Yangon plan for a long time. And in the emails of Hillary Clinton, starting a Shia-Sunni civil war in the region would benefit Israel. So regional powers in Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they have increased this sectarian hatred against the Shias and against other minorities so much that there is no way back now from it. You will need decades to reform the people. People who were born in Syria, like myself, and I lived, let's say, 21, 22 years old, and I grew up in a healthy environment. I was not educated on sectarian hatred, but the people who came after me, who were born, let's say, in Syria, or they were 10 years old when the war started, and they lived in this poisonous environment, in war, destruction, poverty, misery, and then you're listening all the time on your outlets that this is the fault of the minorities are traitors, the Shias are infidels, and the Alawites are infidels, and this and that all the time. You will grow up indoctrinated. So first things first, you need a national leader in Syria. You need someone who is patriotic. You need someone who treats everybody equally. And he brings with him these values and ideas, which it's your responsibility to inject into your people. Otherwise, if you leave the country in the hands of Jolani and his ilk, who are in every aspect of life, if you go to any ministry now, there is the director or the head of the ministry or any, let's say, government building, and then you have a sheikh somewhere in the building giving instructions to the people, to the workers, and everywhere. So these Salafists are in every aspect, in mosques, in public sector, in universities, everywhere. So you cannot build a nation state, and you cannot make a revolution against Jolani under such circumstances. It's a wishful thinking, in my opinion, for the people who wish to do that. I also wish that, but it's the bitter reality on the ground says that Jolani is going to stay for quite a long time. And we could see the liberation of Syria maybe in 30 years, but not anytime soon. So people have to be really careful about this and have to be truthful about the reality of the matter, and especially how much the Syrian people are tired, those who believed in a nation state, and how much the people who came after the regime change are emboldened and have guns and are they are terrorists, basically. You saw what they did to the Alawites and to the Druze. If you raise your head and you say no, they will come and slaughter you with the hundreds. So Jolani already sent a quite clear signal to the people that if you rise against me, this is going to be your destiny. We will come to your towns and kill you based on your sectarian and ethnic background. And they have mass murdered thousands of people. Over 11,000 people got killed since the regime change in Syria. But the counting stopped, and nobody is counting the deaths in Syria because it's no longer useful for these so-called NGOs and media outlets to count the deaths toll in the country now that their boy is in power.
Well, thank you very much, Kevork. It was a pleasure having you. It would have been good for us to have done a longer show, but of course, you've got to continue the great work that you do for your show. Before we go, Kevork, where can people find you?
Thank you so much, brother, first of all, for having me back on your show. I'm doing daily live streams on my YouTube channel, Syriana Analysis, between Monday to Friday at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time, and I'm discussing different regional and international topics on my channel.
It was a pleasure having you, Kevork. And Kevork, before we go, can I just give a quote to Syrians who are not giving up? Because, Heidi, this will just be very quick. So Mark Twain says this, to Damascus, years are only moments, decades are only flirting tuffles from time. She measures time, not by days and months and years, but by the empire she has risen, and propose and to crumble to ruin. She's a type of immortality. Damascus has seen every occurred on earth, and she still lives. She looks upon the dry bones of 1,000 empires and will see the tombs of 1,000 more before she dies. Throughout other claims, the name Old Damascus is right by the Eternal City. So, folks, if you're listening to that, never give up. I do believe Syria will rise again. I do believe it will rise again. And I'll tell you what, Kevork, I think we are going to see the collapse of America soon. And I think this next few years are going to be positive. I could be wrong, but I'm just saying that to just, hey, give some bit of hope. It's all good.
I hope in our lifetime we would see the liberation of Syria. In our lifetime. That would be great.
Anyways, thank you for court, everyone. Please go check out his work. Go check out Syriana Analysis. Go give him a like. Go follow him on Twitter. He's absolutely fantastic. One of the best people out there on politics. Very smart, very clever. Does fantastic interviews. So knowledge about this topic. And thank you for everyone for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 172. Take care. Remember to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Remember to share this around with your friends and family. Take care, everyone. God bless you all. Stay safe. Thank you for joining my show. Take care, everyone. God bless.